a very good company from a corporate standpoint, right? And it's one of those companies that has stood the test of time, right? Semiconductor companies come and go. And my slogan was always that, some people ask me, why did you start Tessolve and all that? I said, look, I want to create an environment where there is no fear. I went to my prof and say, I would like to move. And then he said, computer science is only for dumb people. And then, but anyway, most of those guys ended up working for Microsoft and became multi millionaires because of all these bad experiences, right? I used to complain to my wife that, hey, the people that I'm working with don't seem to make the right calls, and they are failures. And so she kind of pushed me, said, if you're so smart, why didn't you start your own company?
In today's episode, we're joined by Raja Manickam, the founder and CEO of IVP Semiconductors, India's first fabless chip company. With over 30 years in the sector, Raja previously founded Tessolve, a semiconductor testing and design services company that surpassed 1,000 crores in annual revenue. Now, IVP Semi is aiming at localizing chip production in India with chip design centers in Chennai. We'll explore his journey all the way from his early days till today and talk to him about the future. Welcome, Raja, to the show. Really looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you, Mazin. Thank you.
So, Raja, we usually start with a rapid fire round, so I'm going to jump right into it. If you could be a profession in any other field unrelated to your current work, what would it be and why?
I love sports. I used to be a hockey player and basketball player during my college days. Unfortunately, I didn't grow tall enough to play a basketball player. But I think I would have been a coach, right? I love team sports. I believe in numbers, strength in numbers. So coaching, building teams is what I think I would have really enjoyed.
That's fascinating. And I'm sure, building a startup is in some ways like building a team of your own. What's one tech innovation that you're excited about that you think not many people are talking about yet?
I think, on one hand, we're talking about, technology infiltrating in everybody's life more and more, right? So I think the power consumption is going to go through the roof. But, rather than, creating more power to run these gadgets and, our lives, right? How do we create components and gadgets and so on, which consume less power, right? So there is a whole frame of thought on how to go about doing it, but it's not getting the limelight because of vested interest. They want to build more power plants and and how to cool these things. But I think there is a whole area of exploration that needs to be done.
No, that's interesting. All the way from the incentive systems to how do you actually kind of drive change. What's the last book that impacted you deeply?
Yeah, interesting. I read quite a bit. I try to read like at least one book a month or so. There is a book, which kind of recently I read, Born to Build.
Okay.
Born to Build by, I think it's Jim Clifton, I think. But fantastic book. It basically changes the way you question yourself, right? Or question your team, or how you question the business, and puts a very different perspective on why you should be doing something.
It's a good one to check that one out. Biggest takeaway from working at Texas Instruments and Tata Electronics?
Okay. So, very good question, actually. Texas Instruments, right? I came out as a fresh grad, right? Right, with how fresh grads are, right? We're very idealistic, and it was like it's like it's a toy shop, right? You get to pick, what you want, and great company, even during those days in the 80s, they were very open, right? So if you were inquisitive, right, you could learn a lot, right? They were very open to learning. It wasn't like guarded, only a few people have access, right? So I was very fortunate that, I joined Texas Instruments. And being a very nerdy guy at that time, I was just enjoying life where, you learn a lot and lots of things, right? So that was a great learning from a technology standpoint. but also, very good company from a corporate standpoint, right? And it's one of those companies that has stood the test of time, right? Semiconductor companies come and go, but these guys have been there, one of the pioneers, right? In the 50s they started, and they're still there and very relevant as well. Um, so I think, and fortunately, I also started as a manufacturing in the manufacturing. Most people, they start, they go into design and so on, like some of my colleagues, right? I'm a ECE guy. But I was fortunate that, I got into a lower rung of technology in that, manufacturing, nobody wants to do it. So I learned from the bottom up, right? So, because once you start as a design engineer, you'll be a design engineer forever, right? So I kind of moved up. So I think, lots and lots of learning, and understood the entire company, how a semiconductor, the different aspects are done, from manufacturing, design, how to run product lines, in the factories and to the, corporate and so on. So it was a great learning. They're very open, right? So coming to Tata, right, which was my last, big company. It's a fantastic company, legacy and so on, great people, right? But they were just the opposite, right? Uh, Quite, in their own way. I mean, they do big things, right? So they want to be careful about doing big things, right? They don't want to really do very small things, right? They want to build very large businesses, and so on. So I think it is good for a later stage kind of business, in my opinion. For a startup kind of environment, right? It's tough for them to kind of wrap their hands around this. So I think I had a different, how you take care of people, how you build a legacy, how do you build a brand. I mean, the branding thing was just amazing. How they, that it's so important for them, right? Any decision they make. So there was a lot of learnings there, and great people networked. I got into a sphere of people that I would never have met in my life, because Tata brand takes you there, right? you know, I mean, people like BlackRock or something, right? So you get to meet those kind of people. So I think, I benefited quite a bit personally, and I could see, their vision of what they wanted to do in a big way. So very, very different companies.
Yeah, thank you for that. And would love to, as we get into this, to go through your journey in chronological order. But to quickly wrap up the rapid fire, what's your favorite hiring question?
Okay, so I am being a techie guy, electrical engineering guy, or electronics. So very basic question I ask, right? See, there is how you configure a serial resistor, a series of resistors or series of capacitors, and then how do you do high bandwidth and low bandwidth filters, right? So, I mean, these are very basic questions. Everybody should know. I mean, if you finish undergrad, but how they explain to me, right, the physics behind it. I love physics, so usually I ask a question there, and I can kind of figure out, whether they have the aptitude for understanding. So it's a very simple answer, but the way they answer it is very, tells you a lot about the, how they can break and explain to you very simply. So that's one of my favorite questions I
That's a
ask.
good one. That's a unique one. I definitely haven't got that one before. I like that. What's one truth that few people agree with you on?
Um, I'm a first time entrepreneur. My family. In fact, I'm one of the first graduates in our family, right? So I think if you keep at it doing something that you totally believe in, it doesn't matter your background and so on, and especially in technology, right? People always feel that in technology you need to have the network or the financial backing and so on. I believe that you know technology will solve many of the problems. In fact, the adopting of technology is where the stumbling block is. But technology has solutions for almost anything, right? It's only a question of adoption. So I keep pushing on this, and there is a pushback usually where they say, "Oh, no, no, especially vested interests who are already there, right? So the changing of that and the control. So we have a lot of back and forth on those kind of things.
The good one. So, to start with your journey, tell us about early days. Where did you grow up? Um, you mentioned that you were the first graduate in your family. That must have been quite an event. Walk us through your early days and
Yeah, I actually was born in Singapore, right? But when I was 3 years old, I came to India, and my father was a teacher, and I mean, those days you don't need to be a graduate to be a teacher. In fact, they were very good teachers those days. And so we come from a farming family. My mother was from a farming family close to Madurai. So we were five of us, my brothers and sisters, and my brother is actually a designer in Qualcomm, and my sister is a doctor also in the US, and so on. So I think, but one thing was very pushed in our family was education, right? It says, hey, if you really want to be something, right, education has to be fun. I mean, I guess this is a very common theme in Indian families, right? So ours were no different. My grandfather, I don't know, probably he's dropped out of school in fifth grade or something. I don't even know what grade he did, but he was very instrumental in pushing us to be to focus on education. And so I think we had a lot of that parental push for that. But also I think somehow it was my focus in classes was always very. I never used to go and do any homework or something. I mean, my focus is always in the class, right? During the class time, I'm very focused. After that, I'm playing hockey or playing something else, right? So the focus, so I always had this, appreciation for that. So I'm a very focused guy in anything that I do. So I think that kind of personality, right, was very helpful. And then, yeah, and then engineering. My physics was my favorite subject, physics and math. Yeah, I kind of topped it in my school as well. I went to school in Trichy, in RSK High Secondary School, BHEL Central School those days. So it was pretty good. So another thing, I think I should give a lot of credit to my teachers. Um, they really, I mean, those days also, right? Once they see a student with, wants to do something, they kind of respond really well. They want to, pull him along and make him better, right? So I had very fortunate about that all throughout my life, even my Kharagpur days. Fantastic profs that helped me through understanding the fundamentals and so on. So I think I was very fortunate that throughout my life, from elementary school, high school, I had excellent teachers who were just willing to pull me through the. So my basics fundamentals were strong. I think from a personality, and I take up after my family because they were farmers. My mother was very inclusive, right? Always trying to pull everyone together. So that's where I learned, people matter. I'm always a very people person throughout, so it's like molded into me. So when I built Tessolve, right, I always call it my Tessolve family. And my slogan was always that, some people ask me, why did you start Tessolve and all that? I said, look, I want to create an environment where there is no fear, right? So that you can be innovative, right? Because once you fear of your job or, and
it's a big inhibitor, right? Like if your basic things are not taken care of, it's hard to go out and take risks. And,
that's right. That's right. So that's my early life. And like most people, right, after I finished Kharagpur, most of us left the country. so, So I was no different, so I got a job in TI, and that was my first job. And
Where were you located? Where did they?
oh, yeah, actually, I was located in Singapore first. I had worked in the factory in Singapore. I was a test engineer for memory products. And then I was working there for a few years. Then I moved to Fairchild in Singapore because my boss moved to Fairchild and he pulled me along. I was there for a couple of years, and then they said, "Hey, you better go to the U.S. because you can do more things in the business unit." So they sent me to U.S., and so I moved to the U.S. in 1988.
At this point, you had transitioned from working in manufacturing to moving more to the design end, or how is your work evolving over these years?
Yeah, so yeah, I was into manufacturing also, right? I used to write test programs and all that for testing, so I used to work on the ATE program and so on. I'm always a very hardware guy, right? So even during my college days, my favorite subject was device physics. In fact, during my college days is when the computer science just started. My third year, I think, they started computer science, and half my class moved to computer science. And I went to my prof and say, I would like to move. And then he said, computer science is only for dumb people. And then, but anyway, most of those guys ended up working for Microsoft and became multi millionaires. The hardware guys have to do hard work to make to earn our living. But anyway, yeah. So I
You
was
moved to the US, where East Coast, I assume. Uh,
yeah. So in the US, I actually was in the East Coast. I used to work for Fairchild. I moved into what we call business unit product line for logic products and so on. So there, I actually led a team. Later on in there, I led a team P&L for telecom. And during those days, I used to, and then Fairchild got bought by National Semiconductor, and I used to visit C. Delhi, C. Bangalore, to try to get our chips, designed into that because at that time India just opened up in the mid '90s, right? So I used to visit. I used to work with a lot of C. Very young engineers, trying to get our chips designed into their systems and all that. So that was so I ran the telecom business unit for a while. So there I understood how to define a product, fund a product, how do you get it to market. I used to also go to Finland to Nokia. At that time, Nokia was, flying high, right? In the early '90s, mid '90s. So I was involved in a lot of our products getting designed in. So I used to work with the engineers there. So I got a lot of field appreciation with customers. How they decide, how do they, what are the problems that they see, and not only on the technical side, but also the business decisions that goes be. So that I learned quite a bit on that. Yeah. Then 2000, and then I moved to the Bay Area, and then I was in the East Coast near Boston for many years with Fairchild National. Then I moved to Bay Area, and then my whole perspective changed because in the Bay Area, everybody wants to do a startup, right? So
you did, getting the itch.
and
Okay.
I did. I joined some small companies, but fortunately, unfortunately, none of the companies that I joined made it. There is this statistics that 8 out of 10 startups fail, right? So I always seem to be on the eight. You know,
That's the more likely option. But yeah,
yeah. Statistically, it's more likely
only
to.
one that mattered, right?
Yeah.
But
So that kind of pushed me to know the question. The next question is that you could ask is, because of all these bad experiences, right? I used to complain to my wife that, hey, the people that I'm working with don't seem to make the right calls, and they are failures. And so she kind of pushed me, said, if you're so smart, why don't you start your own company? So she kind of egged me along, and she said, "Okay, you're the smart man in the house, so do it." And I mean, this is the truth. So finally, I said, "Okay." And usually what happens in the U.S. is, when you have kids, and once the kids go into college, right, you kind of say, "Okay, I've done my part, right? Now I can take some risks." So my kids were in college, and I said, "Okay, now if I do it now or I don't, right?" But I always had this, thing to come to India. I wanted to, because I felt that India missed the boat with all the talent, with the depth we have, right? In manufacturing, in, building our own products and so on, right? Because of government policies, because of, various things, right? But I always wanted to come back to India and build a company. And so 2004, I decided, and because I started as a test engineer, so I felt that that's something I know I can do it in my sleep. So I started TestSolve, which is a test engineering services company. I actually wanted to do a manufacturing company, the OSAT we talk about today. I had my plan in 2000, but nobody wanted to fund it.
Yeah, I mean, and like for our listeners, I mean, we all know that it's a capital intensive industry, and it was early days in India. Walk us through some of those challenges when you try to pitch it initially in 2000.
Yeah. So I mean, one was, India was absolutely not willing to put any capital, right? It's all about service, right? So it's almost like a linear curve, right? So every time I meet with the VCs, in fact, I met with some of the famous VCs and, bankers and so on in Mumbai and so on, very famous people. And they would draw a curve, right? And they say dollars on the y-axis and people on the x-axis, and it's a linear curve, right? So if your business model fits there, we will fund you, right? And mine was like, almost like a bottom, goes down for a long time and then kind of, hockey stick, right? They didn't understand the model, or they're not willing to fund that. So yeah, so I think, the and uh, we, as a country, right, on all those people who had the money and so on funding, I think they were not ready to go beyond India, right? And semiconductor is global, right? It's not a, so one is, they could not understand this, that it can be done. And I think, the service industry, sometimes I feel it's a curse, for us, because they were so successful, right?
Yes,
So they
it
say,
just brilliant process, right?
just
And
do
fix
this, right?
everything.
We can make a lot of money on this, right? And, rightfully, right? I mean, we are kind of, so I think, that kind of put a damper on a very, very techy, nerdy type of activity that, we could have done much, much better. But I think those were the challenges. And a lot of us, who worked in the US and all that, at some point they say, "Hey, man, I have a good life, right? Why would I want to go to India and struggle and so on, right?" And then after some time, they just lose the patience, and then they said, "Okay, forget it, right?" But I was one of those guys holding the flag and said, "No, no, 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 we got to do it. We got to do it." So I said, "Okay, let's do the service first, right? See what the market will accept, and then slowly, right? Based on that, you build some credibility."
So walk us through that journey. So how did you go about, setting up this services company? I mean, 2004, you decided to move back to India. Did you have, a customer then, a team? Where were you at?
Mazin, I think you must be doing this for a long time. You ask all the very, very important questions. So, yeah, so, so because of my network, right? I knew TI guys very well, obviously. And, TI was there. TI was the first, chip company to actually do a service out of India, right? I think 86 or 88 or something they started. So, there was a fair amount of all these MNCs were there. So I targeted them as usual, right? Because there was no Indian company per se, right? So, we targeted them to do, part of their work. Basically, I say, "Hey, you do this test and, engineering internally. Can you give me that work, right?" So things like that, right? So it was like very straightforward. Whatever you do internally, it's a cost arbitrage. I do it for you, maybe, 20%, 30% less or something, right? And I take more risk in that sense. So It was that kind of a model. But the funny part was the people I knew really well did not give me the business, although they said they will, okay, before I started. And the first businesses that I really got were people who did not know me at all right? And I was thinking, probably the people who knew me thought that I could not deliver.
Or, yeah, different.
So the unknown people just took a chance. Okay, I don't know this guy. Just try. Maybe give him something, right? And so so that could be it. And also from my perspective, I think I wanted to prove that it can be done, right? So I was working really really hard to deliver, right? So if and especially people that I don't know, right? You tend to really come out and show,
Yeah,
right?
a burden.
With your friends, you can say, yeah, it didn't work. Give me another shot, right? But with a stranger, you can't do that, right? So I think in a way it worked out. So yeah, there was a lot of disappointment in the sense. We blew our money very quickly. I put my own personal money, and then and then as I told you, this is the first venture, and within the first 18 months, pretty much burned through, and we had to buy capital, so we had to buy equipment. And again, right, I was very idealistic at that time, and said, hey, we should go into RF and things like that, which were just coming up, right? So the latest technology. I didn't want to do the old stuff. So we ended up buying the wrong equipment because there was no market for it. Right? It is still developing. So there's a lot of learnings, right? A lot of learnings. But I think what kept us positive in all of this was the people that I had were young engineers. The absorption, the learning that the speed of learning was. I think Indians probably have a very very good edge there, right? If you pick the right people and so on. So very very enthusiastic. And once we started delivering one or two projects, right, then it started to roll.
So it was the first person who just took a shot on you, and then walk us through that. You say it started to roll, but I'm sure there was a lot happening. Uh, I mean, was it what? So what were the next steps? Like you got your first person to finally buy in, and so what? Help our audience understand a bit more. What the scope of your work was. So you were helping them kind of take on the testing piece. How did that work exactly, and what
Yeah.
was your delivery to
Yeah.
customers?
See, testing, chip testing, the physical testing, right? So that is what we were doing, right? So you had physical testers, and so we had the wafers, we had the package, that we need to write test program. So it's in the physical world, right? So one is going through the logistics of getting the product in and out, and then designing the test jig and all that, right? So it's not like you just sit and write a code somewhere, right?
It's a different like physical apparatus for each chip. It's not
Correct.
reusable.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so we needed in a lab with that, all this equipment, clean room, right? So all that thing I had to build, right? In fact, I took the guy, with the Bangalore architect to Singapore to see, a
This
test
is
factory. Yeah, I took him there, show him, right? And then, and because I had friends all over the place, right? They're very kind enough to open and show them and all that. And some of them actually came to say, to my factory to help us, settle some of this. The other thing is, we had a lot of Indians, working in, all these factories, right? Singapore, Malaysia, and all that. So I managed to pull some of those guys, right? So, yeah, so that was also very very helpful, and they're all like dying to come to India, right? For opportunities. So I got the cream of the crop in that sense. But I think what it was a very slow process. If I look at my business plan that I had, starting in 2004, I mean, it took us 10 years or so to get to some reasonable, cash flow and break even kind of thing, right? Whereas in my business plan, the third year I would be flying, so, but yeah. So I think lots and lots of issues we had, especially cash flow issues because and in my enthusiasm, right? I hired a lot of people. And I had this mental block that I will never lay off people, right? Because American companies are very, remember I told you about, no fear, right? No fear of your job, right? So I said, no way, I'm going to keep the people. Um, so it was tough, and I borrowed money from almost anybody who would listen to me or who had some money. And a lot of friends and all that, showed up. Some of them made good money in their own, companies and all that. So, they said, okay, Raja, go take this 100,000, 200,000, just don't bother me anymore. Uh, I had a lot of, goodwill that I had built probably over the years. And they saw the genuineness in what we were trying to do, and the team, right, in the team. And there were some people in the organization who also, participated, tried to, help out and so forth. So I think the financial management part of it, if you ask me, could have done better. And what not to do, right? I think, we being a optimist by if you're a founder, right, you're optimistic about many things. So
Absolutely.
everything seems to be good, right? So I think, what not to do was something that I learned throughout the process, because we wasted time and money also, right?
What would you have done differently if you could go back in time?
What would I have done differently?
Yeah. You
Yeah,
said you learned a lot, it kind of dragged out. So, yeah, over those 10 years, especially the first 10 years.
yeah. So I think, certainly financial management is one thing that I could have done with a little bit more help, right? Prudence on which one we should invest and which ones, so stay focused on some of those things that I should not be venturing in at the early stage, right? Although everything looked connected, right? But, say, how do you slice it and say this is one area we want to build? So I think I could have done that differently. Um, and I think the other thing that I could have done differently is spending more time on a strategic alignment, because I think I didn't have the confidence, right, to go to these big companies, right, and say, I mean, although I worked in big companies before, but I did not have the confidence of saying, hey, just give it to me, I will do it, or, being persistent about it, being more able to convince. Today, I feel no matter, the company that I have today, IVP Semi, right? It's a small company. I have the confidence of a $1 billion company. I mean, I'm nowhere close to it, but that kind of confidence I did not have. Uh, but if I had that, I think because it was so obvious to me, with all the design work coming to India, I mean, test should be a no-brainer, right? But I did not emphasize that as much as I could. Um, so I think if I had to do differently, I would have been more bold, in seeking out the right decision maker on the other side.
And it sounds like now with IVP Semi, you have an opportunity to do that. So walk us through the kind of second half of your journey with your first company and then the transition to IVP. What is your thought process?
So, like you mentioned, right, we need a lot of capital because, the lab and equipment and our cash flow requirements because, working capital, because, when you have all this equipment, right, whether your business or not, you got to keep them running, right? I can't switch off the equipment, right? So it's a 24/7, it's powered up and, it's consuming and so on, right? So a lot of, those kind of things. So I took a lot of money, right, from VCs, and I had very good name brand. Oh, the other thing, very important point is, I always felt that if you want to have a world class company, you need to have the systems, right? Accounting system, financial system from day one, right? Very very accountable, so that when somebody wants to invest in your company, right? The moment they look at your books or they look at this, right, it comes out clean. Even if there is a little question, right, they get worried, right? And this is a lesson that I really want to make this point for especially for Indian entrepreneurs. The perception of Indian entrepreneurs that hey, you may cut corners, or things are not very clear, transparent. Like transparency, I think is very very important, because once you do that at the at the right at the start, right, you'll be able to raise money. You will be able to talk about it to in many forums. I mean, just the credibility builds very rapidly. So I always made sure about that. So I did not have problems raising. I did have problems raising money in that sense, but not in that sense, but more of the business, semiconductor and so on. But I always, had no problems there, right? In terms of, the compliance, the ethics of, and how you spend your money and so on. So I think, so I took a lot of money from VCs, and, VCs have a, I mean, you guys are VCs, so, you have a certain runway, and then, and I had, Qualcomm Ventures, Applied Ventures. These were all their first investments in India, right? Jafco, Japanese, then Singapore Technology. So I had, brand name, and then finally, second or third round, I had Reliance Capital. So I had, really big brands, right? So they also helped me with the governance, right? Because they were very careful about governance. So all that actually helped. But but VCs are VCs, right? They wanted an exit, and this was a service business. And then we also had to go through the 2007, 2008 slowdown, the mortgage issue and all that, right? So business dried up. So I think so at the towards 2014, 15, there was a lot of pressure, and the company was just turning around, becoming positive. We became zero debt, right? I'm talking about debt. I think people have a misperception about India as well. We were banking with SBI, okay, and I can tell you SBI was very very supportive of us. Yeah, I had very good experience with SBI personally. In fact, the same manager who was looking after us had also Kingfisher, and and he said, sir, you are you. If you can't make the payment, actually you come and tell us, and try to work with us. That fellow took a lot of money and doesn't show up. So it was kind of, but they really, really, helped us. I know how banks work even in the US. So I think there's a lot of misconception. I think in India, if you're compliant and you come across as genuine, there are people who will work with you on that. So I had some good experience there. So I know I had to sell in that sense, to give an exit to the investors. Uh, but so there was a somewhat of a pressure. And then finally, but I wanted to sell. I wanted to create a legacy company, right? I don't want someone to buy it and become a dot in their bigger business, right? And all those, big service companies like TCS or HCL and all that, right? Yeah, they were all very interested, but they were like Goliaths, right? I mean, they were like billions, and here I am, under 50 million, 60 million business, right? So I think I got worried that my people will be gone, right? They will be dissolved into a metric, right? Just a number, right? So although I was under pressure to, so and then when Hero came about, actually Hero was interested in my manufacturing business, because I always said I wanted to do manufacturing. But when I talked to them, right, and I said, look, I got to give an exit on this before I can go into manufacturing. And then they started looking at this. And then they got very interested in the service business and said, oh, this is much better than manufacturing with no risk. So, so, this, so they said, we'll do this, right? So they bought out all the investors. But and they were also diversifying as a family. And so they said, hey, this is new business for us. So so I had to run it for another 5 years after I sold it in 2016.
Wow.
Yeah, which was fine. I always enjoyed what I do. And then during the COVID, is when I said, okay, I want to kind of semi-retire, and so then there was a succession plan. One of my guys, moved up to become the CEO, and I was on the board as the vice chairman. But then after I joined Tata, I resigned because of I don't want any conflict. But I think overall the journey, I'll say, very very fulfilling. Because as I said, it's always like a family, right? I always treated this a family. There's a great feedback that I got about the employees, and even today, right? They're I guess the joy is when other people are successful, and we made it a point also because of my background. We were hiring first time graduates uh, in a rural areas, right? So we made it a point. A lot of my managers were not very happy about it. It says, how can I put this guy in front of customer? He doesn't talk. He does. I said, hey man, they will appreciate you for life, right? You give them this opportunity, and so so we did a few things in the company which were very fulfilling. So I'm very proud to say that any big company, any the top 20 companies, you will see a Tessolve employee, ex Tessolve employee. They'll be there, especially in test engineering. I can
That's
tell you whether
legacy
it's
right there.
Intel or every company, even Samsung, every company in the world.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And, and so, incredible journey. And so you almost came out of retirement to set up IVPs. I mean, in a sense, walk us through that journey and how did you, what was the thought process? Was it just purely that, hey, I've learned all these things. I know I could do it so differently this time around. Or was it just the situation and now India being ready to kind of make the capital and
No, actually, Mazim, it's actually different thinking. Okay. My view is this. If you look at all this semiconductor, right, is controlled by probably about 10 companies in the world, right? 70-80% they control, right? In every sector, right, manufacturing, there are like three or four biggies, right? And then there is the chip companies. There are about 10 companies which has about 80% market share, and then you look at memory, there are like three companies which do that, right? So there's huge companies, right? And I feel that they have actually are, the bigger you are, right, the more focus on margins and profitability and so on, right? So the market they're addressing is usually the affluent market where, there is spending, there is, so they react to that, right? Because, see, when I started, right, like TI, for example, the entire company was full of nerds, right? Right from the CEO, everybody, including even the CFO, right? So everybody will be nerds, right? So we'll just enjoy this, right? Yeah, but it was that kind of environment, right? You fast forward 30, 40 years, right? And now you see, a lot of them are financial metric driven companies, right? So, I mean, it has evolved, right? So the nerds are there, right? But they're somewhere in the lower, basement, doing some tinkering here and there, right? A lot of innovation actually happens outside of these big companies, right? And they just buy the IPs or they do. So what I feel is the power of semiconductor, the power of technology to have profound changes in globally, right? We have big problems, right? Climate changes, poverty, wars. I mean, all kind of things, right? We have, but we're not addressing those problems, right? Because the way these companies are structured, right? It is more and more, I mean, look at automotive, right? Right? Whenever you talk about automotive, right? They want to make it the more luxury car, this experience. I mean, in my village, right? I mean, the guy is like, struggling to, make ends meet, or and he's got problems with this. So I think you got my point, right? So I
yeah.
think My view is, IVP will look into, how do we create solutions for the real world, right? I call that real world, right? On sustainability and, how do we, so I'm not so, you know, as a business, yeah, you need to generate cash flow and all those kind of things, but you want to really, really solve these problems, right? And I think it will come from the grounds up, right? From, grassroots, right? Young people like you, right, who are very idealistic, right? These are the people that we need to build this, right? It has to be a grounds up approach. And I want to give them a platform to do that.
But it's fascinating. It's a fascinating concept. But how do you reconcile, the business side of it with other metrics? Like, will you evaluate people based on some different set of metrics, or how do you kind of, you know,
Yeah,
avoid them?
as I said, right, there is, fundamentally there is people who think like me, right? Who say, hey, this is what is important, this is what matters, right? So you build that team, right? So for example, right, my team, I have a guy who's super duper on power, right? And he's building modules, right? He's building modules to reduce the power consumption for standard stuff, right? Whether it's air conditioning or cold room or stuff like that, which are real issues, right? We can't tell hey people don't use air condition, right?
They have to use it, and then you
You
just
use it,
yeah.
but again, at the time, you use it, in the, so, if you look at the bigger companies, they're not, they actually want to have products which consume more power because then they can sell more, right?
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? So it kind of like,
That's a really interesting example. So, for that project, let's say, how do you set a budget, and how do you measure success of that project?
yeah, I think, see, it's not just financial metric, right? So the problem that I see is, everything is measured on financials, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is what I'm getting at,
So,
right? And
so
that's
that's
what your
okay,
investors would want, and that's what everyone else around you would expect, right? So,
yeah, yeah. So I think, there is a move for, whether it's ESG move or, there are other companies as well. I think, more people like me and so on who, who believe in this, and evangelize. Eventually, right? I mean, these are good things to do, right? The right things to do. And I think the money will follow this, right? Because you got to think about this, right? What is the next frontier? Making the next best iPhone is not going to, yeah, will make Apple richer, right?
it's just incremental change, right? It's not a step
Yeah,
change.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there are a lot of people who don't want to work in Apple, right? Because they're very idealistic, right? They say, no, 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 no. I want to solve this problem, which 70% of the people in India have this problem, right? So whether it's medical or which may not be a pure financial return, but it's the right thing to do, right? So I think I'm always going against the grain in that sense. And so I tell my investors the same thing. I said, look, this is how I look at my vision of how I want to measure myself. And if you're aligned with this, you put money into my company, and we'll all enjoy this, right? And there are many people just sitting around with money, man. What are you
So,
doing?
yeah, enjoy it. No, that's years of reputation, and obviously
Yeah, there's
proving
some credibility.
many
Yeah,
times that
exactly.
allows you to
If
do
I
that.
said this 20 years ago, nobody would.
Laughed out of you. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, incredible. And just to kind of double click on that a little bit more, maybe some of the big themes that you're seeing, or for other people who are passionate like you, how can they get more involved or do more?
No, I think, this is a movement, right? I mean, one is, IVP itself will be a platform for people to come on board. What we are looking at is, the DLI scheme that is coming up. I mean, DLI, you may have heard about it, right? Design Link Incentive. I want to create a fund that will co-invest with the DLI people, right? So DLI gets, 10, 15 crores. So the fund that, that I'm working with, will, if you get DLI, we will put another 50% or 100%, right? So suddenly you made this 15 crores, 30 crores, right? And then you go to the MATI or some other organization, government or states, and then said, okay, in order to, because you think about this, right? We have so many engineers, right? But we don't even have one chip company, right?
No,
In
it's
India,
crazy. Why,
right?
why, why do you think that is? It's
No, because we have great designers, right? Designers go and start up companies.
yeah.
Then they they love designing, right? And they whatever money they have, they get exhausted in 2 or 3 years. They don't know how to take it all the way to a product because that's not their thing. They may have one or two guys, but that's what is lacking, and that is money and time and the network, how you sell, how you get it designed. There's a lot of software involved in it, so that part of it is missing.
It goes back to services and making money
Yeah,
quickly, but
yeah. So yeah, so
long-term bets
then
and
yeah, then they
infrastructure.
just sell the IP, and then some few fellows will make some money, and then some big company will just buy them out. This is India's story, right? So my view is, with all the money that is going into semiconductor and all that with government, at least two companies must come out of India at the end of 10 years. They in the top 10 chip company, right? Period. That should be our goal. So how do you do it, right? I think different ways of doing it, and I think what could start as a small way of focusing and doing this, and I think government is certainly aligned with this. Some of the big boys, I think, like people like L&T are doing on their own, trying to do some things like that. I think more and more guys will it's a movement, man. It's a move. Yeah.
So on that note, what do you think the next 10 years looks like? What's your vision? Where do you think India will be in terms of semiconductor manufacturing?
Yeah, I almost gave up, right? I thought in my lifetime I won't see it, manufacturing coming to India, because there's so many false starts. And in fact, some of the forums I used to say that, hey, I'm not going to retire unless you guys do manufacturing. Otherwise, you have to listen to me, right? But I think I can happily tell you that it's happening now. And I think the phase one, where you got government funding these big boys, and they're and Tatas and all that will definitely do, right. And they have the muscle to, even if there's a delay, right, they will do it, right. And that's a right move. So now there's phase two, which is from now for the next 10 years. I think we need to do the product side of thing, as I told you, right. The real issues, and any problem that India solves is a global solution, right. It's a frugal solution. It's a real solution that is going to impact people, right. Impact the globe, impact so I think the 10 years will be great. And my view is India will be the solution provider, the technical solution provider
To the world, you
to
think?
the world.
When it comes to what specifically, what niche do you think India can lean towards? Is there any specific area that we'd be better than everyone else at, or
No, I think all the solutions we come up with are very frugal in nature, right? So in whatever we do, one is creating of the product itself. Like I mentioned to you about power, right? We don't have power, right? We don't have power. We don't have a proper grid. So the solutions we have will be like off grid, for example, right? And
fit
storages will be a
into?
lot more, yeah, a lot more natural kind of storages, right? I mean, I'll give you an example, right? I mean, let's say you want to store energy, right? You can pump water and store it during the time when that power is not used, right? And solar in the daytime or something, you can have a small, yeah, and then you recycle, right? Bring the water. I mean, this are just giving you an example, right? And micro solutions in that sense. So,
That's the idea.
yeah.
And so, to wrap up, what's one piece of unfiltered feedback that you received from someone that really impacted you personally or professionally?
I think, my boss, I want to say in TI, his name is Steve Dixon. One of the things he told me was, Raja, make decisions, right? Even if you don't, you may have 50%, 60% information, but don't worry about making decisions. And that really stood in my head. I'm never worried about making decisions, right? Right or wrong, make a decision,
and move on and then yes.
Yeah, most of the time it's wrong, but it's okay, right?
You have to be wrong. You have to be right more often than you're wrong, and then you'll
Yeah.
get somewhere. I guess.
Yeah, and you learn, right? You learn, right? So that's the
Yes.
most important thing, right? So I'm never afraid of making decisions, and that's something that, as a, and especially if you're in a position of making decisions, right? You're the privileged few who are put in that position, right?
Yeah.
You should make the decision, right? Whether you're a government secretary or you're a VP
Whatever
of a
context.
company,
Yeah.
right? Or you're a founder of something, or family, wherever it is, right? If you are given that privilege, which is very few people have the privilege, you should make the biggest thing is you're given the privilege and you don't make a
I
decision.
wanted to say. Oh, that's a really good one. Thank you so much, Raja. We could go on, but we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure chatting.
Thanks, Mazin.